Well, viewers, we've spent a lot of time digging into the deep lore of locations, magical items, and organizations over the last few videos, but it's time to dig into something more controversial. So do some theorizing. I want to talk about magic, and I want to talk about if psionics are in fact magic. And in order to uncover this mystery, we're going to have to talk a little bit about what magic in Dungeons & Dragons is. How does it work? What are its restrictions? And what classifies as magic? And where does it come from? Now, under initial inspection, the magic lore in Dungeons & Dragons seems pretty cut and dry. Mortal spellcasters draw power from the Weave to produce magical spells. The Weave is tended to and managed by the goddess Mistra. Mistra watches over the Weave and manages how much mortal creatures can pull on the Weave in order to cast their spells. This is also the in-world lore reasoning for why you cannot cast spells above level 9. Level 9 is the maximum power of spells that the Weave can sustain with a casting population without rending the Weave like we saw during Karsus' Folly. However, there are ways to circumvent this. Mistra occasionally has a chosen of Mistra, somebody that Mistra finds to be a special magical boy who can cast spells beyond level 9 and experiment with what magic can really do. We were on our third incarnation of Mistra at this point, and apparently her tastes haven't changed. And isn't it strange how Mistra does seem to like guys who look almost exactly like the kinds of people who write Dungeons & Dragons lore? Bearded old weird guys who are really into magic. And it is always old men, but I suppose that kind of makes sense, as it is implied that the chosen of Mistra are people that Mistra finds romantically appealing, which, God, it's gotta suck to be a lady wizard on your knees praying for Mistra to have her bisexual awakening. That does make me think of an incredible character concept. Imagine if you had an old wizard who used to be a chosen of Mistra. Then when the latest Mistra came in, he lost all his powers and went back to level 1 because she wasn't interested in him anymore. And he's just constantly griping about how he's not Mistra's type anymore and he doesn't know what happened. I guess this is kind of Gale. Anyway, moving right along. This is the established doctrine. Magic comes from the Weave. The Weave is managed by Mistra. If either Mistra or the Weave are destroyed, there is no more magic. This is in fact a lie, or perhaps more accurately, a half-truth. Because we do have established lore of who can cast spells when both Mistra and the Weave are out of commission. When all other spell casting fails, you can still count on a fireball from a psionicist. Now, I should probably clarify what I mean when I say psionicists, because the term gets a little bit mixed up between established story lore and in-game mechanics. In terms of mechanics, psionicists are usually depicted as classes like monks and battle minds and a bunch of other stuff we haven't heard about since 4th edition. But in terms of lore, things get a little bit more complicated, because in Dungeons & Dragons lore, we have psionicist wizards. People who are wizards cast wizard spells, but do them with their mind. Now, again, on the surface, you might be asking yourself, well, Puck, what difference does this make? They simply access the Weave in a different way. A wizard's a wizard, whether he uses his brain or his hands or a spellbook. Or maybe it's just a different kind of sorcerer. Well, that would all have dark implications, and we'd have to rethink the whole way we do sorcerers, because psionicists could continue to cast magic without the Weave. And proof of this isn't hard to find. Much like when you're trying to figure out if something glows in the dark, all you need to do is turn out the lights, or in this case, turn off the Weave. And we've had the Weave turned off in the last 100 years of lore in a little event known as the Spell Plague. For those of you who don't know about the Spell Plague and the Time of Troubles, because maybe you have lives and families and social lives, the short version is this. There was a time when all of the gods of Faerun were forced to walk the earth in mortal bodies to teach them a hard lesson about being gods. At the same time, the goddess Mistra, at this point Mistra number 2, was slain, causing the total collapse of the Weave and the loss of all magic in Faerun. But that's okay, we moved on to Mistra number 3 and everything got better. But in the meantime, during the Time of Troubles, during the Spell Plague, all magic stopped working. You couldn't access magic from the Weave, even magical items were on the fritz and having difficulty operating. So that's the lights going out. What was glowing? Illithids and psionicists. And we actually have pretty good documentation of this from the Forgotten Realms Legends of Drizzt books. It's actually during the Spell Plague, the Legend of Drizzt books center on what's going on in the Underdark, particularly in Menzoberranzan. See, the Spell Plague hits Menzoberranzan at a pretty rough time. The number one house in Menzoberranzan, House Banri, is in a little bit of a tough situation as they're facing an uprising from other houses. And so far that uprising has been quelled by the impressive magical power and faith in Lolth that has kept everyone from attacking House Banri, where all of a sudden all magic stops working, all of the magical wards and traps around House Banri fail, and House Banri can no longer get miracles from Lolth to save them. Yeah, that was the whole thing with the gods being sent to Earth in mortal avatars. They weren't granting miracles anymore, so all the clerics stopped working too. Side tangent, does clerical magic come from the Weave or does it come from the gods? We'll get to that in a minute. Now, back to House Banri. The biggest threat to House Banri's power at this time was House Oblodra, and the thing that made House Oblodra unique in Menzoberranzan is that they had cultivated a small army of psionicist mages and wizards. They were training psionicists daily, so they were the only ones who had access to powerful magical spells. And we know that the Illithids could still access magic through mental power because Methil El Videnvelp, an Illithid ambassador who worked with House Banri, was still able to cast spells. So much so that he made himself invisible and scarce, even though House Banri was trying to get him to get his Illithid friends to help defend House Banri, but that didn't work out. And look, some people might say, okay, well, maybe they're using their psychic powers to imitate magic spells. I'd be willing to meet you halfway on that argument if monks of the Way of the Sun couldn't cast Fireball. And whenever these spells are described, they're described as existing spells, not as emulating spells. So where is the power coming from? If the Weave is down and magic comes from the Weave, but psionicists are able to cast magic, where is the psionicist magic coming from? And more importantly, if the magic doesn't come from the Weave, is it still subject to the same restrictions that the Weave places on traditional magic? Now, these are tough questions to answer. Whenever we see psionics cast their magic in lore, like in the novels and in the books, we always see it from the third person. We don't ever see it from their perspective. There's never a moment where an Illithid or a psionic spellcaster is casting a spell and you can see their inner monologue where I reach into the nether and pull out the magics necessary to cast the spell and fire it off. That doesn't happen. So because of that, it's tough to surmise exactly where the power is coming from. And I feel like that's the first thing we need to uncover. So we may not know this, but we can theorize, and here the Spell Plague and the Time of Troubles help us out again. We know that during the Spell Plague, clerics and paladins could not use the magic granted to them by their loyalty to their gods, and we know that spellcasters like wizards and sorcerers couldn't access magic from the Weave. So, since psionics were able to cast spells during the Time of Troubles and the Spell Plague, we can safely assume that the magic that the psionics are tapping into does not come from the Weave or from gods. Interesting side note, we can also question here where exactly the magic that the gods have comes from, because even though the gods were not granting their miracles and their magic to their clerics and paladins during the Time of Troubles because they were trapped in mortal forms, they did still have magic of their own. In fact, there is a documented case, again from the Forgotten Realms book, where the avatar of Lolth walks into House Banri and gives them a little bit of magic to get them through these trying times. Perhaps the simplest explanation is that the gods simply have power within them that they can use to cast magic and do not need the Weave, but that's not what we're here to talk about. Circle back to that later. So, we know that psionics aren't getting their magic from deities, and we know the psionics are not getting their magic from the Weave. So what options are left? Well, let's count down some theories. Theory number 1. The magic was in you all along. The psionics have magic within them, power within them, that they tap into, a kind of latent ability that allows them to conjure these magical spells through other means without tapping into the Weave. I'm on the fence about this theory. On the one hand, it theorizes that there's a lot of power under the hood when it comes to psionics. They are tapping into a huge amount of inner power. This has a ton of implications because when you take into the idea, in order to do the amazing things that magic does, other spellcasters have to reach out and tap into another power source and channel that power source into this magic. The idea that psionics have all of this inside them elevates them to almost godly status. Or maybe they have just taken a piece of that magic and have kind of an inner weave, and that is the regulation that they have on it. It does raise a lot of questions, so it's a bit of a messy theory, so that's kind of why I don't love this one. Another theory is that the psionic power, psionic abilities come from another weave. What, you thought there was only one weave? There's actually 3 different weaves, although the other 2 may not exist anymore, hard to say. Shar, the Dark Lady, Mistress of Shadow, Lady of Loss, created her own weave with blackjack and hookers. She called it the Shadow Weave, and it exists in the planes between worlds and only grants power specifically to her followers and people that she chooses. So the Shadow Weave, probably out of the question. I don't think any power is coming from the Shadow Weave. There was a Demon Weave for a little while. This was a creation of Lolth after Mistra died the second time, but I'm pretty sure the Demon Weave just didn't work out, at least in the long term. The point is not necessarily to surmise that perhaps the psionic power comes from the Shadow Weave or the Demon Weave, but instead to realize that the creation of the Shadow Weave and the Demon Weave set a precedent. The establishment of the fact that a second weave, another weave, can be created. So, what if this kind of secret weave, this mind weave, is what psionics are tapping into when they use their abilities to cast magic or cast spells? This kind of deep cosmic energy, this ancient weave that they tap into to use their power. But who would have created such a thing, and where would it have come from? Well, hard to say, but it's probably also safe to say that as with the origins of psionic abilities, it probably ties back to the Illithids. And it's important to remember we know very little about the origins of mind flayers in the Illithid race. There are 3 different theories as to where mind flayers come from, and none have been proven. So I think once we have the answers to those questions, maybe we might find the answer to where psionic abilities come from and where the psionic power originates. I like this theory. I feel like this is probably the most likely of the 3 options as to where psionic power comes from. It doesn't answer any questions as to how psionic power is governed. Is it simply a matter of capability or a matter of training or time put in that maybe psionics could reach levels beyond 9th level spells? Who knows? Who's to say? My 3rd theory is vague and simple. Using psionic abilities requires you to tap into a kind of deep, mysterious cosmic power. It's the ancient energies that exist out in space and in the universe. You tug at those, and that is how you create the magic. Like I said, pretty vague and unsatisfying, but I feel like this is also another possibility. Psionic abilities originate with Illithids. It's even said in House of Blodra that they sent their wizards and their priests to train with Illithids in the Illithid cities to better hone and to master psionic abilities. So Illithids are the source of this. Illithids are from space. It's space magic. Psionics are space magic. That's, again, not satisfying. Again, raises more questions, but I feel like this is also another very possible outcome. And those are the theories. So, as you can see, magic is a little bit deeper than the traditional doctrine of Mistra and the Weave, and that's all there is. We didn't even touch on natural magic, and we still have questions about where the god magic comes from, and maybe I'll get into those in another video. But why don't you tell me what you think? Do you think psionic magic is really magic, or is it just crazy psychic powers? There's some debate about that as well. I think it's just a different kind of magic. Where do you think the psionic magic comes from? Do you think I'm out of my tree with these theories that I'm talking about? Please let me know in the comments below. Do all that fun stuff where you like, comment, and subscribe. Please, if you want to play some games of Dungeons & Dragons, check me out on startplaying.games, where I have lots of games listed throughout the week, and I got a lot of open seats if you want to join one. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you in your next video. Till then, buck out.